The Versace dress had been missing for 3 weeks. Custom-made midnight blue with hand-sewn crystals along the neckline. A gift from my father for my 40th birthday last year. I'd torn apart my closet looking for it, even accused the dry cleaners of losing it. Now I knew exactly where it had gone. She sat in the front row of my father's funeral in my dress, holding my husband's hand. The crystals caught the light from the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's Cathedral, throwing tiny rainbows across the pews like the universe was mocking me. "Becca, what the hell are you doing here?" I hissed, standing frozen in the aisle. Rebecca Thornton, 28, marketing executive at my husband Grant's firm, and apparently his mistress, turned and smiled. Her smile was perfectly practiced, the kind you learn in finishing school or from YouTube tutorials on how to be a sociopath. "Natalie, darling," Grant said, "you'd be emotional today." She squeezed his hand, and I watched my husband of 15 years physically shrink in his seat. "I'm here for support. Family supports family during difficult times." Family? The word came out louder than I intended. Heads turned throughout the cathedral. "I'm practically family now," she announced, loud enough for the entire congregation to hear. "Grant and I have been together for almost a year. It seemed appropriate I be here. A year?" The math was easy and brutal. Our anniversary trip to Paris, the weekend conferences that suddenly multiplied, the late nights at the office handling mergers. "That's my dress," I said stupidly, because apparently my brain had decided to focus on the least important betrayal in front of me. "Oh, this." Becca stood, did a little twirl. "Grant gave it to me, said you never wore it anyway. Such a shame to let beautiful things go to waste." I looked at Grant, then really looked at him. He couldn't meet my eyes, just stared at his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. This man who'd held my hand through my father's cancer diagnosis, who'd promised for better or worse, who'd stood beside me at 100 family dinners, was now sitting with his mistress at my father's funeral. "Natalie." My Aunt Helen appeared at my elbow, her voice sharp with barely contained fury. "The service is about to begin. Sit down. But sit down." She guided me firmly to the front row, to the seat that should have been mine, next to my husband. Instead, I sat one row back, behind the woman wearing my dress and my life. The funeral began. Father Martinez spoke about my father's kindness, his integrity, his devotion to family. Each word felt like a knife twist as I stared at the back of Becca's head, at the way she leaned into Grant, at how his arm rested across the pew behind her. My father would have hated this. James Crawford had been many things: a successful corporate lawyer, a generous philanthropist, a weekend sailor who never met a regatta he didn't want to enter. But above all, he'd been fiercely protective of me, his only child. When Grant had asked for his blessing to marry me, Dad had taken him sailing. They'd come back wind-burned and smiling, and Grant had a black eye from a swinging boom. "Your father's quite the sailor," he'd said. Later, Dad told me, "I made it clear what would happen if he ever hurt you." Now, Dad was in a casket at the front of the church, and Grant was hurting me in high definition for everyone to see. The eulogies began. My cousin Mark spoke about sailing adventures. Dad's business partner discussed his ethics. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium on unsteady legs, past Becca in my dress, past Grant, who finally looked up with something like panic in his eyes. The cathedral was packed. Dad had touched many lives. I saw clients, colleagues, the kids from the youth sailing program he'd funded. "My father," I began, then stopped, cleared my throat. "My father called me 2 days ago. He was in hospice, barely able to speak, but he had something important to tell me." I held Grant's eyes in the crowd, held them. "He said he'd hired a private investigator. He was worried about me, said I seemed unhappy. He wanted to make sure I was okay." I paused. Let that sink in. Imagine his surprise when the investigator's report included photos of my husband with another woman, multiple hotels, romantic dinners, even a weekend in Cabo that was supposedly a business trip. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Becca had gone very still. My father's last coherent words to me were, "Don't let him take anything else from you, sweetheart. I've made sure of it." I looked down at my notes, the ones I'd written at 3 a.m. this morning after the family lawyer had called. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I was too focused on losing him to process anything else. Grant was standing now, trying to leave, but Aunt Helen, God bless her, had positioned herself at the end of the pew, arms crossed, like a bouncer. But this morning, I continued, his lawyer explained, Dad changed his will last week. Would you like to know what it says, Grant? Natalie, please. Grant's voice cracked across the cathedral. To my daughter, I read from the paper I'd tucked in my speech notes, who called me yesterday about her husband's affair, I leave the bulk of my estate in a trust that cannot be accessed by her spouse under any circumstances. The beach house in Martha's Vineyard, the investment portfolio, the sailing yacht Integrity, all held in perpetuity for Natalie alone. Becca was on her feet now, her face flushed. Grant, what is she talking about? What estate? Oh, she didn't know? Of course she didn't know. Grant had always been careful about appearing self-made, never mentioning that half his investment capital had come from my trust fund, that we lived in a house my father had bought, that his entire lifestyle was subsidized by Crawford money. Furthermore, I continued, my voice stronger now, to Grant Morrison, my son-in-law, I leave the sum of $1 and a piece of advice. A man who betrays his wife during her father's final days deserves exactly what he's earned on his own. Nothing. This is inappropriate, Grant shouted. You're making a scene at your father's funeral. No, I said calmly. You made the scene when you brought your mistress to my father's funeral wearing my dress. I'm just providing the narration. Mr. Blackwood, Dad's lawyer and longtime friend, stood up in the third row. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private. Actually, I said, there's one more thing. Dad was very specific about this part. He wanted it read publicly in front of witnesses. I found the paragraph, smiled despite everything. To Rebecca Thornton, who my investigator tells me is under the impression she's about to become the next Mrs. Morrison and inherit a fortune, I leave this reality check. The house, the cars, the country club membership, the investment accounts, all of it came from my family, not Grant's. I hope this information proves useful in your future decision-making. Becca turned to Grant, her voice shrill. You said you were wealthy. You said the house was yours. The investments were yours. They are mine, Grant insisted weakly. Community property doesn't apply to inherited assets or gifts from family, Mr. Blackwood interjected smoothly. I made sure of that in the prenuptial agreement you signed. You remember the one where you agreed that all Crawford family assets would remain separate property. I had never loved my father more in that moment. Even in death, he protected me one last time. Becca was backing away from Grant now, her stolen Versace dress suddenly looking like evidence in a crime she hadn't known she was committing. You lied to me. You said she was keeping you in an unhappy marriage, that you were trapped because of the money. Classic, Aunt Helen muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Father Martinez cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. No need, I said, stepping down from the podium. I'm finished. Thank you all for coming to honor my father. He was a man of integrity who believed in truth and consequences. I think he would have appreciated his final act of both. I walked down the aisle, head high, leaving chaos in my wake. Behind me, I could hear Becca's heels clicking on the marble floor as she actually ran out of the cathedral. Grant was calling my name, but Aunt Helen's voice cut through. Don't you dare follow her, you pathetic little leech. Outside, the California sun was bright and merciless. I sat on the cathedral steps and laughed. Actually laughed for the first time since Dad's diagnosis. My phone was already buzzing with texts from family members who'd witnessed the spectacular implosion of my marriage. A hand touched my shoulder. Mr. Blackwood stood there looking somewhat amused despite the circumstances. Your father, he said, would be proud. He always said you had more spine than people gave you credit for. Did he really change the will last week? The moment he got the investigator's report, drove me to his bedside at 2 in the morning. He was quite specific about the timing, wanted to make sure it was ironclad before he trailed off. Before he died, I finished. He knew he wouldn't be here to protect me anymore. He also left you this. Blackwood handed me an envelope with my name and Dad's shaky handwriting. I opened it right there on the church steps. My darling Natalie, if you're reading this, then Blackwood has just detonated the bomb I left in my will, and your husband is discovering what it means to stand on his own 2 feet. I'm sorry I won't be there to see his face. I'm sorry still that you're hurting, but you are your mother's daughter, stronger than you know. She rebuilt her life after worse betrayal, and so will you. The boat is yours now. Take her out beyond the harbor. Feel the wind. Remember that the best sailors aren't the ones who avoid storms, but the ones who learn to navigate through them. All my love, Dad. P.S. Check the safe in my study. Combination is your birthday. I left something else for you. I was crying now, but they were different tears than the ones I'd planned to shed today. Mrs. Morrison? A young woman approached hesitantly. I'm Sarah from the Chronicle. I was here to cover your father's funeral. He was such a prominent figure. But what just happened? Would you like to make a statement? I thought about it. Thought about Grant inside, probably still trying to salvage his reputation. About Becca, who'd run off in my dress. About the phone calls I'd get, the lawyers who'd circle, the social fallout. Then I thought about my father, who'd spent his last coherent hours making sure I'd be okay. Yes, I said, standing and smoothing my black dress, my own dress purchased honestly. My statement is this. James Crawford was a man who protected his family until his last breath. Today's service was a celebration of his life and values. The fact that it also exposed those who lack such values seems fitting. And your husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, I corrected, and he can keep the dollar. He'll need it more than I will. I walked to my car, actually my car, another gift from Dad, and drove home to the house Grant would have to vacate within 30 days per California law and Mr. Blackwood's efficiency. The safe in Dad's study contained exactly what I'd expected. Every document I'd need for the divorce, copies of the investigator's report, financial statements showing exactly what was mine and what was Grant's. Spoiler, very little was actually Grant's. And a set of keys. The keys were to a small beach cottage in Carmel I didn't know Dad owned. The deed was in my name, dated last month. A sticky note in his handwriting said, "For when you need to escape and start over." The view is spectacular at sunrise. I packed a bag that afternoon, let Grant come home to an empty house, let him figure out how to explain to his partners that his lifestyle was about to drastically change. Let Becca keep the Versace. It would remind her that not all that glitters is gold, and some men's promises are as fake as their bank balances. The cottage in Carmel was perfect, small, private, with windows facing the ocean. I sat on the deck that first night, wrapped in a blanket, watching the waves crash against the rocks. My phone was hundreds of messages, some supportive, some scandalized, some from Grant, begging to explain. I deleted them all except one from Aunt Helen. Your father would be raising a glass to you, so I'm raising one for him. To truth, to consequences, and to new beginnings. I raised my own glass of wine to the sunset. Thanks, Dad, for everything. 6 months later, the divorce was final. Grant got exactly what he'd earned on his own. His salary, his 10-year-old BMW, and his reputation in tatters. Becca had dumped him within a week of the funeral, apparently uninterested in a relationship with a man whose primary asset was another woman's family money. I kept the cottage in Carmel, but sold the big house, used part of the proceeds to establish a scholarship in Dad's name for young women studying law. For those who understand that integrity is worth more than inheritance, the endowment read. The sailing yacht Integrity became my weekend escape. I learned to single-hand her, spending long days on the water where Dad's spirit felt closest. Sometimes I took friends, sometimes I went alone. Always I remembered his words about navigating through storms. On the first anniversary of Dad's funeral, I received a package with no return address. Inside was my Versace dress, dry cleaned and perfectly preserved, with a note.
I'm sorry. B. I donated it to charity. Some things, once taken, can never really be returned. Trust, like designer dresses worn by mistresses to funerals, falls into that category. But here's what I learned from my father's final gift. The best inheritance isn't money or property. It's the knowledge that someone loved you enough to protect you even after they're gone. It's the strength to stand up in a cathedral full of people and speak your truth. It's the wisdom to know that starting over isn't failure, it's freedom. Dad knew Grant would betray me eventually. He probably suspected the affair long before hiring the investigator. But he also knew I'd need to see it for myself, need to make my own choice about leaving. So he gave me what every parent hopes to leave their child, not just financial security, but the tools and courage to rebuild when life falls apart. He gave me proof that I was loved, evidence that I was valued, and resources to start over. And in the end, that's worth more than all the Versace dresses in the world.